Whisper of the Waterfall. Part 1. Into the Depths. I never imagined that a simple trip to the Amazon would turn into a nightmare. When our group of 12 tourists set off to explore the famed Whispering Waterfall, we were filled with excitement and wonder. Little did we know, this journey would plunge us into terror beyond our worst fears. Our guide, Alejandro, was a seasoned explorer who assured us that the hike to the waterfall was challenging but safe. The dense jungle enveloped us, the sounds of wildlife filling the air. We followed Alejandro, trusting his expertise as he led us deeper into the heart of the Amazon. The first signs of trouble appeared as we neared the waterfall. The lush greenery around us became darker, more oppressive. The usual sounds of the jungle grew quieter, replaced by an eerie silence. A heavy mist hung in the air, obscuring our path and making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. "Stay close," Alejandro instructed, his voice steady but tense. "We're almost there." When we finally reached the Whispering Waterfall, it was breathtaking. The water cascaded down a sheer cliff, disappearing into a misty pool below. But there was something unsettling about it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. As we stood there taking in the view, a strange whispering sound filled the air. It was faint at first, like a distant breeze, but it grew louder, more insistent. I glanced at my fellow tourists, seeing the same confusion and unease on their faces. "Do you hear that?" Sarah, one of the tourists, asked, her voice trembling. Alejandro nodded, his expression grave. "It's the wind," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. We set up camp a short distance from the waterfall, deciding to spend the night and head back in the morning. As darkness fell, the whispers grew louder, now sounding like unintelligible voices all around us. We huddled around the campfire, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. "I don't like this," Mark, another tourist, muttered. "Something feels wrong." I couldn't disagree. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, and the whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sleep was impossible, and I lay in my tent staring into the darkness, my mind racing. Sometime in the middle of the night, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. We all bolted upright, fear gripping our hearts. Alejandro and a few others grabbed flashlights and rushed out of their tents. "Stay together!" Alejandro shouted as we stumbled into the misty darkness. We found Sarah standing near the waterfall, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw something," she whispered, her voice shaking. "A figure, in the mist." Alejandro scanned the area with his flashlight, but there was nothing there. "It's just your imagination," he said, trying to calm her down. "Let's get back to camp." As we turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in the mist. A shadowy figure that seemed to melt away as soon as I focused on it. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickened my pace, eager to get away from the waterfall. Back at camp, we tried to convince ourselves that it was just the darkness and the mist playing tricks on us. But deep down, we all knew there was something sinister lurking in the jungle. Morning brought little relief. The mist had thickened, and we found ourselves disoriented, unable to find the path we had come in on. Alejandro led us in what he believed was the right direction, but after hours of walking, we ended up back at the waterfall. "This can't be right," Alejandro muttered, checking his compass, which spun uselessly in circles. "We should have reached the river by now." Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. No matter which direction we took, we always ended up back at the waterfall. The whispers were louder now, a constant haunting presence that gnawed at our sanity. "We're lost," Mark said, his voice shaking. "We're never going to get out of here." Alejandro tried to keep us calm, but even he couldn't hide his fear. "We'll find a way out," he said, though his words sounded hollow. "We just need to stick together and keep moving." But as the day wore on and the whispers grew more insistent, it became clear that we were not alone. Shadowy figures moved in the mist, always just out of sight, watching us. The feeling of being hunted was inescapable. By nightfall, exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. We set up camp again, though sleep was a distant hope. The whispers seemed to close in around us, and I could feel the eyes of unseen entities watching our every move. In the early hours of the morning, another scream pierced the air. This time, it was Mark. We found him standing near the waterfall, his eyes wide with terror, pointing into the mist. "They're here," he whispered. "The spirits. They're coming for us." As we stood there, paralyzed with fear, shadowy figures emerged from the mist. They moved slowly, deliberately, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. We backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The spirits surrounded us, their whispers now a deafening roar. I felt a cold hand grip my arm, pulling me toward the waterfall. I struggled, but it was no use. The spirits were too strong. As I was dragged towards the edge, I saw my friends being pulled into the mist, their screams echoing in the darkness. The last thing I heard before I was swallowed by the waterfall was the whispers, now clear and unmistakable. "You belong to us." Part 2. Circle of Terror. When I regained consciousness, I was lying at the base of the waterfall, the mist swirling around me like a living entity. The whispers had faded, replaced by the sound of rushing water. I struggled to my feet, disoriented and terrified. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the rocks. There was no response. I stumbled through the mist, my mind racing. Where were the others? What had happened? My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but one thing was clear. I needed to find my friends and escape this nightmare. As I moved away from the waterfall, I caught sight of Alejandro, slumped against a tree. He looked pale and exhausted, but he was alive. I rushed over to him, shaking his shoulder. "Alejandro, wake up!" I said, my voice shaking. He groaned, opening his eyes slowly. "Alex, is that you?" "Yes, it's me," I replied, relief washing over me. "We need to find the others and get out of here." Alejandro nodded, struggling to his feet. "We can't keep going in circles. There has to be a way out." We searched the area, calling out for our friends. One by one, we found them scattered around the clearing, disoriented but alive. Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and the others slowly gathered, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We need to keep moving." Alejandro took a deep breath, his determination evident. "We'll find a way out," he said, though his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "Stick together and don't lose hope." We set off again, trying to find a path that would lead us away from the waterfall. The mist was thicker than ever, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Every step felt like a struggle, the weight of fear pressing down on us. Hours passed, and despite our efforts, we found ourselves back at the waterfall once more. Despair settled over the group, and it was clear that our spirits were breaking. "This is impossible," Mark said, his voice filled with hopelessness. "We're trapped." Alejandro clenched his fists, frustration evident on his face. "There has to be a reason we're being brought back here," he said. "Something is keeping us tied to this place." As we sat near the waterfall, trying to gather our strength, the whispers began again. This time they were clearer, more insistent. It was as if the spirits were trying to communicate with us. "Listen," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" We all strained to hear the whispers, and slowly the words became discernible. "Leave or suffer. Leave or suffer." "We're trying to leave," I shouted into the mist, my frustration boiling over. "What do you want from us?" The whispers grew louder, more menacing. "Sacrifice must be made. Sacrifice must be made." A cold chill ran down my spine as the meaning of the words sank in. "They want a sacrifice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The group fell silent, the weight of the realization pressing down on us. We looked at each other, fear and dread reflected in our eyes. Who would be the sacrifice? How could we make such a choice? "We can't sacrifice anyone," Lisa said, her voice trembling. "There has to be another way." Alejandro looked grim. "If the spirits demand a sacrifice, then we need to figure out what they want. There might be another way to satisfy them without sacrificing one of us." We spent the next few hours discussing our options, trying to come up with a plan. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that we were all on edge. The whispers continued, a constant reminder of the spirits' demands. As night fell, we set up camp again, though none of us felt safe. The darkness seemed to close in around us, and the shadows danced menacingly at the edge of the firelight. Sleep was elusive, and I found myself staring into the flames, my mind racing. In the middle of the night, a sudden scream jolted us awake. We scrambled out of our tents, fear gripping our hearts. The scream had come from Sarah's tent, and we rushed to find her thrashing and shouting, her eyes wide with terror. "Get away from me!" she screamed, swatting at invisible enemies. Alejandro and I grabbed her arms, trying to calm her down. "Sarah, it's us," I said, my voice firm. "You're safe." She stopped struggling, her eyes focusing on us. "I saw them," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The spirits. They were in my tent." We exchanged worried glances, the reality of our situation sinking in even deeper. The spirits were growing more aggressive, more desperate. We needed to act fast. The next morning, we decided to search the area around the waterfall more thoroughly. If the spirits wanted a sacrifice, there had to be a reason. Maybe there was something, or someone, hidden nearby that held the key to our escape. As we explored the dense jungle, we came across an old, overgrown path leading away from the waterfall. It was barely visible, hidden beneath years of vegetation. Alejandro led the way, hacking through the underbrush with a machete. The path led us to a small clearing, where we found an ancient stone altar covered in moss and vines. Symbols and carvings adorned the altar, and a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. "This must be it," Alejandro said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is what the spirits want us to find." We gathered around the altar, examining the carvings. They depicted scenes of ritualistic sacrifices, with figures kneeling before the waterfall, their faces twisted in agony. "We need to perform the ritual," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's the only way to appease the spirits." "But we can't sacrifice one of us," Mark protested. "There has to be another way." Alejandro studied the carvings carefully. "The ritual doesn't specify that the sacrifice has to be a person," he said. "Maybe we can offer something else, something that holds meaning or value." We decided to gather items that were significant to each of us. Personal belongings, mementos, anything that held sentimental value. As we placed our offerings on the altar, the air grew colder and the whispers intensified. With a deep breath, Alejandro began to chant, following the instructions carved into the stone. The rest of us joined in, our voices blending together in a desperate plea for mercy. The ground beneath us trembled, and a piercing scream filled the air. The mist thickened, and the shadowy figures emerged from the jungle surrounding us. But this time, they did not attack. Instead, they watched, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. As the ritual reached its climax, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the mist. The whispers grew fainter, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. It was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. When the last spirit disappeared, we stood in stunned silence, the reality of our success slowly sinking in. The jungle felt different now, less menacing, more alive. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Alejandro nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Let's get out of here," he said. "I think we've earned it." As we made our way back through the jungle, the path seemed clearer, more defined. The mist had lifted, and the oppressive silence was replaced by the sounds of wildlife. For the first time since we arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. When we finally reached the edge of the jungle, we emerged into the bright sunlight, the outside world welcoming us with open arms. We were exhausted, but we were free. As we boarded the boat that would take us back to civilization, I glanced back at the jungle, the waterfall barely visible in the distance. The whispers were gone, but the memory of what we had endured would stay with us forever. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the scars of that experience would never fully heal. The jungle had taken a part of us, and we would never be the same. But we were alive, and for now, that was enough. Part 3. Unseen Forces. The relief of escaping the immediate threat of the spirits was short-lived as we navigated through the jungle. We were physically exhausted and emotionally drained, yet the memory of Sarah's terrifying encounter lingered like a shadow over us. As we ventured deeper into the jungle, The path became increasingly challenging to follow. Thick foliage obscured our view, and the oppressive humidity weighed heavily on our bodies. Each step felt like a battle against the relentless grasp of the wilderness. "We need to keep moving," Alejandro urged, his voice strained but resolute. "We can't afford to stay in one place for too long." He was right. The jungle seemed to conspire against us, every moment whispering with a faint reminder of our recent ordeal. The occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of a bird amplified our paranoia, making us jump at imagined threats. Sarah walked beside me, her usually vibrant spirit subdued by fear. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting the spirits to materialize from thin air once more. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort I could muster. "We're going to make it out of here," I whispered, more to convince myself than her. Sarah managed a weak smile, but her eyes remained haunted. "I just want this nightmare to end," she admitted quietly. The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, each bend revealing another twist in the dense undergrowth. Alejandro led with determined focus, his machete clearing the way with each swing. We followed in silence, our thoughts consumed by the uncertain future that awaited us. Hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and anxiety. We stopped only briefly to catch our breath and drink from the canteens we had filled at the river's edge. The water was refreshing, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the jungle. As the sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, we came upon a clearing unlike any we had seen before. It was small and circular, with ancient stones arranged in a pattern that hinted at ritualistic significance. "This looks like another altar," Sarah observed, her voice barely above a whisper. Alejandro approached cautiously, examining the stones with a furrowed brow. "It's similar to the one by the waterfall," he remarked, tracing the weathered carvings with his fingertips. Mark glanced around nervously. "Do you think the spirits are still following us?" he asked, his voice tinged with fear. Alejandro shook his head. "I don't sense their presence here," he said, though his uncertainty was palpable. "But we can't take any chances." We decided to rest briefly in the clearing, taking refuge among the ancient stones. The air was thick with unease, each of us acutely aware of the fragile peace we had found. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next twist in our journey. Night fell swiftly, cloaking the clearing in darkness. We huddled together for warmth, the flickering light of a small fire offering meager comfort against the encroaching shadows. Sleep was elusive, our senses heightened by the eerie stillness of the jungle night. Sometime in the early hours, a distant rumble echoed through the trees, startling us awake. Alejandro sprang to his feet, his machete at the ready as he scanned the perimeter of our makeshift camp. "What was that?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Alejandro's brow furrowed in concentration. "It sounded like water," he muttered, his gaze fixated on the darkness beyond the clearing. Sure enough, as we strained our ears, the sound grew louder, a distant rhythmic cascade that seemed to pulse through the very heart of the jungle. It was a sound we had heard before, hauntingly familiar yet filled with an ominous undertone. "The waterfall," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "It's calling us back." Dread settled over us like a heavy shroud. The thought of returning to the waterfall, of facing the spirits once more, filled us with a primal fear. But there was something else too, an unspoken understanding that our journey was far from over. "We can't go back," Mark said, his voice desperate. "We just can't." Alejandro's jaw tightened with resolve. "We won't go back," he said firmly. "We'll find another way." But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle itself was conspiring against us, that unseen forces, beyond our understanding, were guiding our path. The whisper of the waterfall echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the relentless grip it held over us. As we sat in the darkness, surrounded by the ancient stones and the oppressive silence of the jungle night, I knew that our struggle was far from over. The spirits may have been temporarily appeased, but their influence lingered like a specter in the shadows. We had escaped the immediate danger, But the true test lay ahead. Finding a way out of the jungle, away from the waterfall's haunting call, and back to the world we once knew. Part 4. Veil of Deception. The night dragged on with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the distant murmur of the waterfall. We took turns keeping watch, our senses heightened by the oppressive darkness that seemed to press in on us from all sides. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the clearing, we gathered our belongings and prepared to resume our journey. The ancient stones stood silent sentinels, their weathered surfaces a testament to the mysteries that surrounded us. "We need to keep moving," Alejandro insisted, his voice tinged with urgency. "We can't afford to stay here any longer." He led the way once more, his machete slicing through the dense undergrowth with determined resolve. The path ahead was treacherous, each step a careful negotiation between progress and the ever-present threat of the unknown. Sarah walked beside me, her expression weary but resolute. The events of the previous days had taken their toll on all of us, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease that refused to dissipate. "Do you think we'll ever escape this place?" Sarah asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the ground ahead. I swallowed hard, my thoughts mirroring her own fears. "We have to believe that there's a way out," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at the edges of my resolve. The jungle seemed to stretch endlessly around us, its verdant canopy blotting out the sky above. The air was thick with humidity, the oppressive heat weighing heavily on our bodies as we pushed forward. Hours passed in a blur of fatigue and tension. We stopped only briefly to rest and replenish our dwindling water supply, the makeshift campsite offering little respite from the relentless march of time. As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows through the jungle canopy, we stumbled upon another clearing. Unlike the previous one, this clearing was larger, its perimeter marked by towering trees and clusters of vibrant foliage. "It looks like someone's been here before," Mark observed, his voice echoing with uncertainty. Alejandro surveyed the clearing with a furrowed brow. "It could be a temporary shelter," he suggested, though his tone betrayed a hint of caution. We approached cautiously, our senses on high alert for any sign of danger. The ground beneath our feet was soft with fallen leaves and tangled roots, a stark contrast to the unforgiving terrain we had traversed thus far. Near the center of the clearing, we discovered remnants of a campfire, a circle of charred stones surrounded by discarded food wrappers and empty water bottles. It was a haunting reminder that we were not alone in this unforgiving wilderness. "There's no one here now," Lisa observed, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah knelt beside the remnants of the fire, her fingers tracing the blackened stones with a sense of reverence. "Whoever was here might have faced the same challenges we're facing," she mused aloud. Alejandro nodded thoughtfully. "They might have found a way out," he said optimistically. "We just need to keep searching." But as the day wore on and our search yielded no new clues, a sense of unease settled over the group once more. The jungle seemed to close in around us, its dense foliage obscuring our view and distorting our sense of direction. "We're going in circles," Mark muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "Just like before." Alejandro paused, his gaze sweeping over the surrounding trees. "We need to find a landmark," he said decisively. "Something that will help us navigate out of here." With renewed determination, we set off again, scouring the perimeter of the clearing for any sign of a trail or distinctive feature. The hours stretched into an endless procession of uncertainty, each step a battle against exhaustion and despair. As the sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows through the jungle canopy, we stumbled upon a peculiar sight. A series of large, moss-covered boulders arranged in a circular formation. "This could be it," Alejandro said quietly, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. We gathered around the boulders, examining them for any sign of markings or carvings that might indicate their significance. The stones were weathered by time and obscured by clinging vines, their surfaces smooth and cool to the touch. "This reminds me of the altars we found," Sarah remarked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Alejandro nodded thoughtfully. "It could be a ritual site," he suggested, or a marker left by those who came before us. We searched the area around the boulders, hoping to find some clue that would point us towards a way out of the jungle. But as darkness descended once more, enveloping us in its cold embrace, our efforts yielded no new revelations. "We can't stay here," Lisa said, her voice tinged with urgency. "We need to find shelter before nightfall." Alejandro agreed reluctantly, his gaze lingering on the mysterious boulders. "We'll keep moving," he said firmly. "We'll find a way out of here." And so, with weary hearts and wary minds, we pressed on into the gathering darkness, guided by a flickering hope that somewhere beyond the veil of deception that surrounded us, freedom awaited. Part 5. Escape. Exhausted and desperate, we pressed on through the dense jungle, guided by a flickering hope that somewhere beyond the veil of deception, freedom awaited. The mysterious boulders had hinted at a path, a marker left by those who had once navigated these treacherous depths. With Alejandro leading the way, his machete slicing through the thick undergrowth, we followed in silent determination. Each step was a battle against exhaustion and uncertainty, but we refused to succumb to the oppressive weight of the jungle. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the tangled foliage, we stumbled upon a narrow trail. It was barely visible, obscured by fallen leaves and creeping vines, but it offered a faint glimmer of hope. "This could be our way out," Alejandro said quietly, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. We followed the trail with renewed vigor, our senses heightened by the anticipation of escape. The jungle seemed to grow quieter as we moved deeper into its heart, as if sensing our imminent departure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of relentless pursuit, we emerged from the dense foliage into a small clearing. The moonlight bathed the scene in a silvery glow, illuminating the path ahead like a beacon of salvation. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and relief. But our journey was not yet over. We still had to navigate through the darkness, wary of any lingering threats that might lurk in the shadows. With Alejandro's guidance, we pressed onward, driven by the singular goal of reaching safety. Hours passed in a blur of fatigue and determination. The trail led us through winding paths and steep inclines, each turn bringing us closer to the edge of the jungle's embrace. At last, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, we stumbled upon a small village nestled on the outskirts of the jungle. It was a humble settlement, its thatched roof huts surrounded by lush greenery and the distant murmur of a river. "We made it," Mark breathed, his voice filled with relief. The villagers greeted us with cautious curiosity, their faces weathered by years of living in harmony with the jungle. Alejandro spoke to them in hushed tones, explaining our harrowing ordeal and seeking their assistance. "We need to leave the jungle," Alejandro explained, his words translated by a village elder. "Is there a way to reach civilization from here?" The elder nodded solemnly, gesturing towards a nearby train station. "There is a train that passes through the village," he said, his voice rough with age. "It will take you to the nearest town." With gratitude and exhaustion weighing heavily on our hearts, we bid farewell to the villagers who had offered us sanctuary. They watched silently as we made our way to the train station, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. As the train pulled into the station, its whistle echoing through the jungle, we boarded with a sense of profound gratitude. The familiar rumble of the train tracks beneath us was a comforting reminder that we were finally leaving the jungle behind. We settled into our seats, the weight of our experiences settling over us like a heavy blanket. The train began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it carried us away from the village, away from the waterfall's haunting whispers, and towards the promise of home. The jungle faded into the distance, its mysteries and dangers retreating into memory. We watched in silence as the lush greenery gave way to open plains and distant mountains, our minds still reeling from the trials we had endured. But amidst the exhaustion and relief, there was also a sense of gratitude for each other, for the villagers who had shown us kindness, and for the chance to return to the world we had almost lost. As the train continued its journey, carrying us towards an uncertain but hopeful future. I knew that the whisper of the waterfall would forever echo in our memories. It had tested our courage, forged bonds of friendship, and taught us the true meaning of resilience in the face of adversity. And as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, I found solace in the knowledge that we had survived. Changed, perhaps, but stronger for having faced the untamed wilderness and emerged victorious. And thus concludes the tale of our journey into the heart of darkness, where the whisper of the waterfall beckoned and challenged us. But ultimately, we found our way back to the light.